continuing on with Mars then, what about being on Mars? I think I mentioned this in a previous video here, but there's just some great shots from the Martian that sort of might give you an idea what it might like to be there. As far as I can tell, with actual Mars pictures I've seen, the landscape looks accurate, the sky looks accurate. There's, of course, the space station that's been set up here, and one of the astronauts is walking around on there. And it was just, I thought the movie was very well done. It was entertaining and definitely gave you a sense of what it would be like, but it was just far too casual to me, because things like this on the actual Mars rover that we have up there, I forgot the name of this one, but you can see that the wheels are sort of getting these holes in them, the cracks in them, as you can see. And this is from the solar wind. So Mars does not have a magnetic field for solar wind protection. So these are some of the effects that the solar wind can have as it constantly sort of hammers, in this case, a metal wheel. So if metal sort of behaves that way, you can start to imagine what a human might suffer if it was on Mars with this lack of solar wind protection. There's some more damage to the wheels there. Just the solar wind is just degrading the metal that the wheels are made out of. And so one of the ideas, though, is, well, could Mars ever be habitable? I mean, maybe it is or isn't now, but that solar wind, lack of solar wind protection, is always going to be a big concern. And so once in a while you hear the word terraform come up in websites and discussions and things about future space exploration in Mars. And a picture like this would come up where you sort of look at it, and at first thought it's a little bit confusing about what actually this slide is showing here, because this one down here, kind of looks like Earth, but not really. This doesn't look like Europe or North America, and I don't really know what this is. Neither does this one, and that looks like Mars right there. So really the only thing recognizable in this graphic is, oh, that looks like Mars because it's red like that, and I sort of showed you a slide for it. But what it is a gradual terraforming example of Mars. So sure, you might start here, but if you get this so-called terraforming started, and of course terra refers to Earth, so maybe morphing Mars to be more like Earth so we can go live there. It might start with number 1 and go over to number 2 here, and then go over to number 3 here, and go over to number 4 here, and this whole process might take something like 1 million years or something like that. But how would you transform a planet like this from the barren, lack of solar wind protection, no atmosphere planet to something that looks sort of lush and livable? Well, as I mentioned in a previous video, I think the last one, Mars has these, they're not shown in this video here, this CO2 in these polar caps here, so it's frozen. And what we know about CO2 from previous videos is that CO2 can help warm the planet if you can get that CO2 in the atmosphere somehow. So it's frozen at the moment, but if you could sort of get it into the atmosphere, then you can get that greenhouse process started. Okay, and so that's what the sequence of imaging is telling you, that it might start here, but if you can get that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the planet might start warming and just might go through the sequence and look nice and livable. Well, how would you do that? Well, believe it or not, the current idea is to drop a nuclear bomb on Mars. Okay, and this just seems like maybe the silliest thing you've ever heard, but if you go back to the idea then that Mars sits here all red and lifeless and barren, but has all this carbon dioxide in the poles, well, what you can do if you drop a nuclear bomb on it is you can melt the CO2, right? You can melt it, which of course would cause the CO2 to sort of start bubbling up and go in the atmosphere, and maybe after, 1 million years or so, you might get a bunch of CO2 surrounding Mars, and of course the temperature then would start to rise, and all these other nice things would happen. There are some water deposits on Mars that could start becoming liquid. There's other carbon dioxide on Mars which could enhance this effect, this warming effect in the atmosphere. So that's sort of the current idea. Yes, it is. Drop a nuclear bomb on the poles of Mars. That's sort of the idea. I don't know whether to laugh or cry, but that's the idea. And so then just a summary of Mars here, again, sort of in comparison with the movie The Martian, which made it seem kind of comfortable and fun to be at. The reduced light levels will be down because it's farther from the sun. Because it's smaller, gravity is going to be less, so you're going to bounce around quite a bit more. It does have the toxic atmospheres we'll discuss. Unlike Venus here, you have to read this statement carefully. Atmospheric pressure is about 100 times lower than Earth. Lower than Earth. Remember, Venus was sort of 100 times larger than Earth. 100 times larger. So we see just really some different aspects of the planet there, there is this ionizing solar radiation at the surface, and this, of course, is a reference to our favorite solar wind that the sun is spewing out. You can see the average temperature is quite cold there, minus 60 degrees C. And remember, and for your comparison here, water freezes at 0 degrees C. So you're well below the freezing point of water, and of course the minus 63 can be compared with the Earth's average temperature of 14. So minus 81 degrees Fahrenheit, if that's the unit we're most used to, versus the Earth's average temperature of 57 degrees Fahrenheit. And remember, the CO2 and the greenhouse gases have a lot to do with this number on Earth here. There is no liquid water to be found. There's the global dust storms. There would be no natural food source. The soil would be kind of toxic for a variety of reasons, and there's no global magnetic field to shield against the solar wind, as we discussed here. And these sort of reasons go hand in hand. So that's sort of a snapshot of your planet there. And so what we'll get into next in the next video then is what is the story of water on Mars.